for the worship leader, on help at daybreak, a hymn of David. Eli, Eli, lama azvatani, rachok meshuati divrei sha'agati. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why so distant from my rescue and the sound of my shrieking? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. I cry out by night, but for me there is no rest. But you are holy. You are enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, an offence to mankind, and despised by the people. All who see me deride me. They curl their lip and shake their head. He threw himself on the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him if he delights in him. But you drew me from the womb, laying me on the breasts of my mother. I was laid upon you from the womb. You are my God from the womb of my mother. Do not be distant from me, for trouble is near. There is no one to help. Many young bulls have surrounded me. Mighty bulls of Bashan have encircled me. A rending, roaring lion. Against me they open wide their jaws. I am poured out like water. All my bones have fallen apart. My heart has become like wax. It has melted inside me. My strength, like baked clay, has dried up. My tongue has been made to stick to my mouth. You are laying me in the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. An assembly of the wicked have surrounded me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count exactly all my bones, but they gloat and stare at me. They divide my clothes among them, and for my robe they cast lots. But you, Lord, do not be distant. My help, hurry to help me. From the sword deliver my life. From the power of the dog deliver my only possession. Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the wild ox. You have answered me. I mean, so for me, sort of getting it, the way I've sort of always got into Psalm is by this doing the sort of translation, but and that's been a kind of focusing thing for me. But Malcolm and Mako, I think you have your own ways of kind of finding a response to the Psalm. I mean, Malcolm, well, you've talked about this a bit before, but it's very much for you. It's been very much the whole sort of thing of going through the whole Psalter, hasn't it?
But the other thing that's been kind of a revelation for me, because the poetic form of the Corona that I used involves the idea that the last line of the poem on one psalm is the first line of the poem on the next psalm, whether or not one can see an obvious connection. And of course, when you pray through the psalms in numerical order, sometimes like between 3 and 4, there's an obvious link. Sometimes, the contrast is striking, if you go straight from down in the depths to the utter heights. So the key line for me is the one which is both the landing place and the springboard. And so what I did when I prepared for the poetry was to read the psalms in those pairs, as it were. Read the following psalm even while I was writing the poem. So for 22, I had been reading 21. And of course, that was fantastic because 21 is a coronation psalm. So it brought the whole context of the horror of what happens, in 22 in the crown of thorns. But while I was reading 22, I was also reading 23 and getting ready to think. And in fact, for that particular sequence, that business of finding the line or the image that would make sense in both psalms became a real opening up of the way the Psalter works to me in a very new way.
Wow. Mako,
how about you?
Mako, were you doing something a little similar with looking at pairs of psalms and the...
Yes, absolutely. So when I started this about 2 years ago, I just had that intuitive feeling that I should embark on this project on the Psalms, and I wasn't really thinking through what it meant. I was in Jerusalem, actually. I was going up to Emmaus, going down Jerusalem, the Emmaus, and it just occurred to me that the Psalms of Ascent that the pilgrims would sing to Jerusalem, post-resurrection journey would be, instead of up to Jerusalem, out into the world. So it would be, in a sense, songs of descent, And I was thinking to myself, well, I want to spend time slowing down on that journey. And so I decided, well, I'll do one psalm, and I'll select materials that are intentionally slow. And I'm using for Psalm 22, this is a 100-year-old ink, calligraphy ink, and you rub it against the stone. And what I've done in the painting actually is use the ink on the inkwell here, but also paint directly using this to kind of the cross shape you see is done almost like a charcoal drawing. And it's quite appropriate for me to be talking about this particular psalm during Lent, because the Sumi ink is compressed ash, literally pine soot. And so for Ash Wednesday and on, it's an appropriate thing to be using ash to paint images.
Wow.
And then as I embarked on this, I realized, oh my goodness, this is going to take me quite a long time, maybe 14, 15 years, because there's 150 Psalms. And as you can see, I chose a very large size, which I also intentionally chose, because this is exactly the size that is too big to put in your car, typical car. So I was very intentional about that. I said, I don't want this to be portable. I want it to be something more substantial, and again, intentionally slow. I have to get my whole body into it. And then Dr. Ellen Davis at Duke, a friend, heard about this, and she emailed me and said, Marco, what translation are you using? And I listed, Robert Alter and of course, all the translations from King James to ESV. And she said, well, I would like to join you and translate afresh per psalm for you.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, thank you very much. And so she started to translate each of the psalms I was working on. I began with 1 and 150 to sandwich the journey.
Right, this is very much what Malcolm actually did.
I did exactly that when I was working on one.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing, because that was my intuition, was to, because Psalm 1 is completely black and Psalm 150 is completely white. And the white paintings use oyster shell, which also takes a long time to prepare, and that's intentional, right? And it's basically, it's not an illumination, it's a meditation. So I wanted the materials to be very much something difficult to produce, and also slows me down enough that I start my day doing these images. So Ellen started to translate for me, and then I was in Pasadena at the time, which I'm now in Princeton, but I had a fellow who is a spoken word artist as well as a painter, and she was helping me, and she read these psalms that Ellen translated, and she said, well, I'd like to read these for you. Once Ellen translates, I'll read it for you and I record it. So when I came into this studio in the morning, I had the recording by Julia Hendrickson of the Ellen Davis psalm, and I listened to it. Sometimes I listen to it like 5 times, because in the span of making the ink or preparing the materials, it's quite a bit of time. So I listen to it over and over, one psalm per month. So, I'm doing this every day. And as you can imagine, it's been quite an extraordinary journey, because you think you get bored of listening to the same
We've
psalm.
got so much to talk about, but let me first of all just thank you for joining us for these conversations. As you'll know, if you've been watching them before, they've arisen out of the book that Malcolm wrote of 150 poems responding to the 150 Psalms, David's Crown, and the selection of illustrated translations that I did during lockdown as well, of illustrated translations. But as you'll see, we've been absolutely delighted to be joined by Makoto Fujimura, who is an artist I've known and hugely admired for many years. If you don't know his work, do look it up. I mean, Makoto was trained both in the Western tradition of art and in the Japanese Nihonga tradition, and his work is an amazing sort of fusion of these two, but also filled with a wonderful Christian spirituality. And I always think if you see you go into a gallery and see a Fujimura picture there, you can just recognize it simply by the sort of beauty that is such a sort of striking aspect of these. There are so many things you could say about Maka, but he's also an author and has written extensively about art and faith, and in fact that's the title of his most recent book, which has just come out, which is subtitled A Theology of Making, and I'm tremendously looking forward to reading that. But because Psalm 22 is quite long, and I've had some technical issues, I've had to split this conversation into two parts before we've really got started. But if you just click the red subscribe button, you should be able to find the second part fairly easily. So see you there.